Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. Today is AMA number 43. It is January 14th, 2021. Welcome, everybody. I will just make sure everything's going smoothly here on Facebook. There I see. Benji is there. All is right in the world. I see Benji has tuned in. Benji, by the way, whenever we're talking about when we're talking about either the AMA or JCC t-shirts, you will not be Benji Love It. You will be Benji Loves It. Oh, we want to hear about Ride for the Living and we want to hear about it now. Oh, patience, grasshopper. Oh, do you mean that giant cool banner hanging beside me in the window? Don't worry, Benji. We'll get there. We'll get there. First, COVID situation in Poland. We're vaccinating people very slowly. 300,000 people or something vaccinated. I'm not sure if that's this week or overall. Might be overall. Don't worry, in a country of 38 million, that will only take 1,000, 100, lots of weeks. Lots of weeks is my estimation. So that's that program. Primary schools are reopening. Most things are still closed here. We still suffer from, we're still under the same protocols as we were. So of course the big news this week, and we're going to talk about our Ride for the Living announcement, but I want to first say hi to Jeffrey Roloff, Saul Schachter. Oh, the big three chiming in already. The big guns. Where's Randy Brenowitz, my Fantastic Four? Jeffrey Roloff from parts unknown, possibly West Coast, possibly Miami. Saul Schachter in New York, and Benji Love It. Benji loves it. My dad tuning in. Hello, Dad. How are you, Dad? Hi, Sita. Rabbi Avi from the Holy Land. From Tel Aviv. Are you in Tel Aviv today, the Holy Land? Ah, the Holy Land in the larger sense, I see. From Efrat. Hi, Rabbi Avi. Good to see you guys. So, if my eyes look a little bloodshot today, it's not from drugs, don't worry. It is from the lack of sleep for a few reasons. One, Kasha's away, so there's no need in Warsaw, so there's no reason for me to behave like a responsible adult and get up and go to sleep and do all these things. I just kind of stay up all night absorbing news, and there's been quite a bit of news. I must have watched 7 hours of congressional testimony yesterday, which was somewhat mind-numbing, somewhat absolutely fantastic watching. If we want to call it democracy at work, we can in some sense call it that, I guess, although it was not as clean democracy as we'd like it to be. Deborah from Berkeley. Hey, Deborah Blank. And Bria. What's up, Bria? I'm going to walk 60 miles. Wow. Yeah. Patience. We will get to that. Cobra Kai is better than congressional hearings, says Benji. Cobra Kai is less violent. Congressional hearings have more acrobatic footwork than Cobra Kai. Ralph Macchio would be better, as would William Zabka. By the way, his name is William Zabka in Polish, in Zabka in Polish. Zabka in English, it means William Frog. Hello, my cousin, Yael. Yael, my cousin from New York. Well, from Israel in New York. How are you? Marcel from Montreal. Hey, Marcel. Good to see you, my friend. We're going to mention you in a little bit as well when we talk about what's going to happen in a couple of weeks and our walk from Auschwitz, which we've called, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but it will be in Marcel's footsteps. But I want to also send condolences to Marcel for what happened in synagogue. One of the main synagogues in Montreal had swastikas painted on it yesterday or this morning, which is just terrible. I can't imagine what it's like to see that for a synagogue, but especially for you, Marcel and Marilla, you and your wife and the other Holocaust survivors living in the Montreal area, to think that there are people who can still do that in 2020, 2021 is horrible. But that's why the work that you're doing, Marcel, is so important. Going out to schools and talking about your life and talking about those the lessons that hopefully the world a little bit has learned. Although I think we've seen that the world hasn't learned as much as we would have liked it to learn. But sorry to hear about the swastikas on that synagogue in Montreal. So the congressional hearings, really fascinating, really interesting to watch. There's a question about what was going to how it was going to play out, how many Republicans were going to, what I feel is, do the absolute right thing and not just fear Donald Trump's base, although it's easy to fear them when they were in the Capitol ready to kill you and hang you up, lynch you a week earlier. So in the end, 10 Republicans voted with the Democrats, who voted unanimously to impeach Donald J. Trump for the second time. With the height of hypocrisy, watching a lot of the Republicans who were saying, oh, but the Democrats don't mind violence and all of these things. And, at the end of the day, it's not like Donald Trump did that in a vacuum. There are plenty of people, and I've said it before, there are plenty of people out there like Donald Trump. It's all about the enablers. In the same sense that when you want to find something positive, you look for those who help. If there's a catastrophe, something terrible happens, you look for the heroes, you look for the helpers. Then when you want to understand how something is possible and something bad happens, you look for the enablers. And those very people, in those sanctimonious Republican congressmen who stood up there and said, oh, it was free speech, he was exercising his First Amendment right to free speech. First of all, it's not, the First Amendment doesn't apply when you're the president of the United States and people and you have a different amount of influence. It's a very different, it's not the same metrics that are used in terms of you or I standing on the corner and saying, oh, we hate this and we hate that and something is corrupt. The president, by being the president, talking about corruption in the election, and 174, was it 147 Republicans voting to question the voting results, the election results, enabled him. This is not a question of Trump just doing it. Trump, you see, when Trump is really bullied and some pushed back on, he backs down a little, like every bully does. So do you blame the bully for being the bully? The guy's 74, he is what he is. The people who enable him are really the ones who are at fault. People who voted for him, sure. You wanted lower taxes, you wanted to pay lower taxes. If the rest of it and the decay of society was worth it, then I guess it was for you. But seeing that happen and seeing people defend him is just really beyond the pale. At the end of the day, we have to be very clear about what happened. There was an election. The election was fair. Georgia recounted 3 times. There's never been an election that has so much attention paid to it, counting 2000, which was only about Florida. Everybody with a fine-tooth comb went over these election results. There were 60 somewhat, I think 63 or lawsuits. Every one of them was thrown out except one. The one lawsuit that wasn't thrown out had to do with how close people were standing. The election observers, the Republicans, were standing 20 feet away instead of 10 feet away, and that was the case that they won. Without question, this election has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb. There was no stealing. There was no widespread fraud, nothing of these. And the president repeated and repeated the lie, the big lie, the way that the Germans did it, the big lie. And the Republicans, because they're afraid of his base and they were only wanted to make sure that they didn't upset this tyrannical fascist president, went along with it, although they know, make no mistake, this isn't some people have one opinion and some people have another opinion. The Republicans who voted for Trump privately know who voted to contest the results of the election last week and who stood up against the impeachment yesterday, they know that this is wrong. What more do you have to do? You say that you say that there are people in the Capitol illegally counting votes. You say counting illegal votes. You say that the whole system is corrupt, and you send your followers to go and disrupt it. How much more clear cut would it have to be impeachable? It's hard for me to even understand. But luckily, through the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, our wonderful friend Nancy Pelosi, who we were honored. To me, one of the honors so far of my time here in Krakow was hosting Nancy Pelosi, getting to speak to her a little bit, getting to really have a few minutes with her and with the congressional delegation. Through her leadership, hopefully things will in Congress went the right way. We'll see. Mitch McConnell it'll be interesting how the Senate vote goes, because it's much less about being afraid in the Senate. They only run every 6 years. They're not as afraid of the base of Donald Trump, and he has 6 more days as president. For them, it's more about if they impeach Donald Trump, then he can't run for 2024. So it frees up some space for the wannabe Republican presidential contenders in 2024, which is interesting. So people have their own motives to vote as they vote, but dark days, absolutely dark days, but bright days as well. The Congress did what it needed to do. The Joint Chiefs of Staff made the statement that it's amazing that they even had to make, saying that Biden will be inaugurated next week. I mean, these are times our democracy was strained, but it looks like it's held. But I'm afraid that we haven't seen the end of Trumpism by a long shot. There are a lot of angry, disillusioned people in the United States who are part of a cult. This is a cult. I think it fits just about every definition of a cult that you can see, people who have been brainwashed by somebody who knows better. And it's a shame. And again, I don't blame Donald Trump nearly as much as I blame the enablers. So, and one more thing, I'm sorry, just one more thing about it, which is all the Republicans stood up, and I see that some of you for sure watched it as well. They stood up and they said, "Oh, but it was free speech. He only said this. It wasn't so bad what he said." So if he didn't want that to happen, if he was against the attack, if he wasn't trying to do this, to cause this insurrection and physically stop the counting of the vote against him, if he wasn't, then why didn't he stop it? He could have gone on Twitter at any moment. He could have gone on to live TV and said, "Hey, you idiots in the Capitol, stand down, get back, stop doing what you're doing." He didn't. He sat there watching it in the Oval Office on TV. Even if somebody else had caused the attack and he watched it, he would be derelict in his duties. But he caused the attack and he didn't do anything about it. Period. But on to happier news. We are announcing, you see something behind me? You see the familiar Ride for the Living logo, but you see a globe and you see Global Challenge. So last year, because of the COVID-19 situation, we moved our Ride for the Living online. We had over 1,300 people that joined virtual Ride for the Living, but we realized that, you know what? They ran, they walked, they cycled 60 miles, some did 600 miles during that month of June. And it's not virtual. If you're out there sweating and working and doing things and honoring the survivors and helping the community, then it's not virtual, it's real. So we decided to rebrand and change the name to Ride for the Living Global Challenge, because it's global, because it's a challenge, because we challenge you to do it. And we're in pre-registration. It's an exciting time. For the next 2 weeks until January 27th, everybody who registers, and it's free to register, takes 2 minutes. There's no fundraising requirement, although of course we're happy for you to fundraise if you want. No requirement whatsoever, no pressure. Get your friends to do it. Everybody who does that, the JCC will receive $18 donation in your name, made in your name, or in whoever name signs up. So we can get people to sign up free and easy, and it's for a good cause, and it will motivate you when June comes. After this long, difficult year, to get in shape a little bit and to honor the survivors. Now, why January 27th? Why is it this almost 2 week period? Well, January 27th is International Holocaust Survivor Day. There's also Yom HaShoah, but this is the International Holocaust Survivor Day. Why is it January 27th? That is the day that Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet troops in 1945, almost 76 years ago next week, in 2 weeks. And so that's why it's the International Day that the world celebrates it or honors the Holocaust on that day. But the reason, there's also a more personal, closer reason to us, which is that on that day, 10-year-old Marcel Zielinski, our good friend, our AMA viewer, our honorary marshal of the ride, our participant since 2015, every year in the ride, has walked from Auschwitz. He was liberated when he was 10. He was in rough shape, and he walked back to Krakow. It took him a few days to do it. He got here. He eventually was a whole story. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but it has a happy ending. He was reunited with his mom, went to Israel, went to Canada, built a whole beautiful family, and has his life. His lovely wife Marilla, who he met when he was still in Poland, also a Holocaust survivor. She was a hidden child. But anyway, to honor Marcel's walk, that as a 10-year-old, Marcel started on January 27th and walked from Auschwitz to Krakow. I, along with Ryan, our JDC, former JDC fellow, now our Friends of JCC Krakow fellow, the director of external relations here, Ryan Kaplan, and perhaps Kasha will join us, will be walking from Auschwitz to JCC Krakow. Possibly Robert Desmond, who founded the ride with us, is going to do it. We'll see if his situation allows him to do it. I did it once before with Robert. It's a tough thing to do. It was a 12, 13-hour walk. It's very cold. It's snowy outside. It's going to be it's going to be like 15 or 20 degrees next week. So we'll see how it goes with the weather. But I did it before. We came up with this idea because we wanted to do something to honor our friend and our hero, Marcel Zielinski. So we'll be doing that, and I'm glad to be doing it with a couple other people on January 27th. So everybody who signs up for the ride, who signs up for the global challenge, signs up for the global challenge between now and January 27th through January 27th, we will get $18 and you will do a nice mitzvah, and then you'll know that come June, you better move your butt and do the 60 miles over the month with us. And there's going to be a lot more announcements coming up. We have something very, very excited planned that I'm not going to tell you just yet. That's going to coincide with that. So please, Sebastian will put the link here. Benji already registered. Benji saw that at a certain, if you give a certain donation, you get a t-shirt. So Benji just had to hear the t-shirt and he went crazy and did it. But I'm going to ruin the surprise a little bit. Benji, I'm going to tell you a package is coming your way. So send us your address and you're going to get a special package in Yafo where you live very, very soon. So with no further ado, I have the honor today of bringing on really just about the nicest guy in the history of the world. No, really nice guy, Dr. Sebastian Rejak. He is the acting director of the AJC office, the American Jewish Committee, Central European office. He worked for the Polish Foreign Ministry for 11 years. He has a doctorate in history, sociology. He speaks 7 languages. He's just a phenomenally good guy. And very importantly for us, a former Ride for the Living participant. How are you today, Dr. Rejak? How are you, Sebastian?
Hi, Jonathan. Hello, and hello to everyone. I'm fine. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I am very well. I'm excited to see you. First of all, how professional. You guys, you AJC guys, you don't mess around with the logo.
Yeah.
Look at me with I stick whatever on the wall. That's all we can do. You're very professional. I like that, Sebastian.
Well, you're no less professional than I am. Well, you have a different background. It's really super professional.
Well, thank you. So first of all, my team will kill me if I don't do it. As a previous Ride for the Living participant, Sebastian, are you going to sign up for the global challenge this year?
Yeah, you already know my answer. I've been in touch with Sebastian, the other Sebastian, and it's done. So I'm looking forward to it, and we as AJC Central Europe will do some publicity for you.
Well,
I would love to say for us, actually, I very much identify with the Ride for the Living. So it's going to be a pleasure simply doing that.
Wonderful. Wow, that's great. Yeah, no, it'd be great to have you back in Krakow. A lot has changed since you've been down here.
I look forward to that.
Dr. Rejak. And wait, and first of all, I have to just get into something. 7 languages. You speak 7.
No, actually, your math is different than mine, actually.
What, 8 languages?
No, I speak some English and some French and a little bit of Russian because that was mandatory back in the 80s, and Ktsat Ivrit, so that you know, and maybe a little bit of German and Italian just to buy something at a store.
Yeah, that's like 7 languages to me, and Polish, by the way. Your Polish is okay.
Yeah, well. Polish, yeah, that I can manage that too.
Polish you can manage. No, it's very impressive. You know, listen, although I'm living in Europe for 20 years and Israel for 7 years before that, I'm an American, and very few things impress us more than people who speak many languages, because we are terrible at languages, as you know. Americans are terrible.
No, it's because you speak the international language. If I was born in America, and I would probably also speak just the international language.
Love. You mean love the international language?
Well, that too.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you know, I part of me thinks if you had grown up in America, you'd probably still speak like 7 languages. But okay.
Free speach. You have the right to.
Sebastian, where are you from?
I'm from here. A lot of people would answer that. Well, I'm a local. Yeah, I'm a local. Wherever I am, I'm from here. I was born in Lublin. I guess to some of our viewers and listeners, that
That may ring a bell. Lublin to the southeast of Warsaw, which used to be the home of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. I now live in Warsaw. I've lived in Warsaw for 22 years now.
It was the biggest yeshiva in the world.
Yep, definitely.
And that
And
city
it earned itself that name in a very short period of time, because it opened only in 1945, 35.
Right. And our Rabbi Avi, who you know very well, Rabbi Avi Baumel, was also Ride for the Living participant. By the way, we're in very Ride for the Living mode. If somebody is connected to it, we throw it out there. So Rabbi Avi's grandfather was a very big rabbi in Poland, and he was called to go to Brooklyn in the 1930s to help them with the small community of Crown Heights. He was a big rabbi, and he was a compatriot. He studied with Rabbi Shapiro, who was the founder of the Chachmei Lublin. So there's some good connection there.
Yeah.
So before I'm going to talk a lot about it. Talk about AJC and what you guys are doing and all that. But I want to go backwards a little, because you were doing something very interesting as well. When I met you, you weren't yet at AJC. There was no AJC in Central Europe yet. We were only lucky to have it here for a few years, but since 2017, I guess 16, 17.
Yes.
But before that, you were in the Foreign Service. So what was the path for you? Did you know all the time, oh, I can't wait to be a diplomat? That's what my life was. That your dream? What when you were in high school and then university, what were you thinking you were going to do, and how did you get and become a diplomat?
So mine was a very weird path. If by a path you mean how you get to work in the Foreign Service, I will just say a few words, and if you want me to elaborate on any of the stages of the path, I'll be glad to do that. So in high school, I thought I would be studying English literature, but it turned out that I studied theology at the Catholic University of Lublin, and that's when I actually got interested in Jewish culture, in Jewish history through theology. I actually took a course of biblical Hebrew, and I wanted to know more about contemporary Jewish theology, because a lot of what we were being taught was about ancient Israel and biblical theology. So I wanted to know more about contemporary Judaism. Then fast forward, I did my doctoral thesis in Holocaust studies, you could call it. It was actually interdisciplinary studies, a little bit of history, a little bit of philosophy, some sociology. And then
let me stop you for a second to elaborate, as you said I could. What
Sure.
was your thesis about?
The impact of the Holocaust on the ethnic and religious identities of Polish and American Jews.
Well,
Yeah.
wait a minute. We might have to we'll take a moment about that. So can you give us just a short, if you have to say in the elevator pitch of what your conclusion was?
So I started off with a working hypothesis, which is the usual thing you do in sociology, and my hypothesis was that because of the Holocaust, people would tend to question the God idea. Specifically, if you're Jewish, because of the Holocaust, it would be more likely for a Jewish person to question the idea of a biblical, personal, caring God. And I had to, and that hypothesis was put to the test of interviews. Like I interviewed 50 people in Warsaw and 50 in New York. And the other test was the abundant literature. And the final conclusion was that far fewer people than I had assumed actually lost their faith because of the Holocaust. Yeah. To some, that was to a small number, that was the decisive element, let's say, or as one person put it, and I remember that to this day, that was the final nail in the coffin for me as a person who had doubts anyway. To some other people, they simply didn't care. My family was always secular, so it doesn't matter. The God idea didn't matter to us anyway. And there were others who would say, listen, it was not God who failed at Auschwitz. It was man. It was the human race.
Yeah.
So that's, and one more thing about people very often ask me about any differences about between Polish and American Jews. There were some differences, and one surprising difference was that, of course, that was not a quantitative research. So I have to be very careful not to try to generalize. But among the interviewees from New York, I had the impression that the Holocaust as a concept, as a social kind of experience, played a more important role in how you shape and build your Jewish identity. Yeah. To a lesser extent than it was the case with Polish Jews. And my answer to that was, just because you live in Poland and it's like all over the place, the Holocaust sites surround you, you don't speak a lot about it. You don't have to explicitly think or point to the Holocaust as an identity building factor.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, my general guess would be, with zero research, without having done a PhD, would be that people that generally, just based on people's views of the divine and of the existence of God and what that means to them, would be people that, as you said, people that didn't believe before weren't going to start believing because of the Holocaust, and people who believed before, I would think most of them probably prayed and used that, we're talking about survivors, right? To me, what would be interesting, and of course impossible research to do, would be the people who were killed. How many of those people started out believing in God, and then the moment that they realized, wait a minute, were, not to get morbid about it, but when their death was in front of them, is it interesting to think, wait a minute, they were failed? I mean, it's interesting because in some sense, you're talking about people who were, it's a group not self-selecting, life happened to them and what happened, but these are people who survived, right? They had the positive outcome of the Holocaust. So it's, it's only, it's a subset of survivors versus 6 million Jews murdered and what they would have thought. But I mean, I feel like if you were pretty religious and you got through the Holocaust, then probably you prayed a decent amount, and that prayer in your mind would have helped you and probably outweighs the idea of, wait a minute, what about the larger sense of who was responsible for what happened?
Yeah, there were a few people who actually started believing in God after the Holocaust, and so their reaction was, because this was possible, and because that was an act of man, we need to seek refuge with God. So there has to be a God to prevent us as Jews and as humanity from going through something similar in the future.
Yeah.
I can imagine your reaction to that.
No, of course, no, I'm a skeptic, but I understand how people believe to some degree. It's not that I can't visualize it. It's I'm one of those people who come from a point of view of being surprised when people actually believe without connection to the Holocaust. Not survivors believe. I'm surprised, to some degree, about the idea of belief, true belief in something external that has an interest in what we do. But anyway, so after your PhD, so how did you? Okay, sorry for that. Was a bit for interrupting you for so long, but it was very interesting to me. How did you get to the Foreign Service?
Right after completing my doctoral thesis, I went to what is still called the National School of Public Administration. If there are among our viewers, if there are people who live in France or happen to know the French administration system, France has something that is called École Nationale d'Administration. So that school in Warsaw is actually modeled on the French school, and its goal is to prepare a number of people in their late 20s, early 30s to be professional public servants, and that was my decision right after I completed my doctorate, and the education in that school lasted for 18 months, after which I immediately landed in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There was a post, the post of desk officer for relations with the Jewish diaspora, and I was very lucky and happy to be offered that post.
Sebastian, you are very well educated. A doctorate and then 18 months after that. My goodness.
Well, 40 exams or something like that. That was crazy. But I laugh at that now, but it was tough time.
You know, I just wanted to maybe go back a second. I don't know if I was clear when I was talking about the idea of the Holocaust and people surviving and they were the lucky ones and stuff. And in terms of belief, I mean, but of course, those people generally lost their entire family. And not saying like, oh, either you had it easy and you survived or you had it bad and you were killed. Clearly is I meant, you know, it's just sort of stuck in my head that I don't know if I was exactly clear about that, that obviously people went through what they went through and they witnessed incredible horror, whether it was their family or not, and somehow survived. So just wanted to put it there. I think I maybe came off as I was being a little bit like.
No, that was clear for me.
Not clear. Oh. So you start at the desk straight away. Now you have it. So you become a diplomat and they go, oh, we have this, was it a new position? Did they create the position?
No. It was not a new position.
There was somebody before you who was essentially you were the liaison, and this is the capacity when I met you, you were the liaison to the Jewish community.
As desk officer, I was serving under special envoy for relations with the Jewish community. And that post was first created in, I think, 1995 or 96. And then the envoy himself had somebody to help him with a lot of work that there was and still is, if not maybe even more today than ever before.
And what was that job? I mean, so tell me maybe from their point, you know, from the point of view, because I think what's interesting is, you know, as from most people watching maybe from the Jewish side see, oh, there's a person from the Polish government who's representing them. What behind the scenes a little bit, like what were you supposed to do? In other words, it seems interesting to me that the government, or maybe to our viewers, I mean, I guess I understand it because I'm involved in this stuff, but that the Polish government has in the foreign ministry, not a whole department, but has a section and people who are working there, you and the special envoy, dedicated to the relationship with the Jewish diaspora.
Yeah, so in one word, I would call that the job or that mission being an intermediary, or the word envoy actually better depicts where or shaliach. You're sent, and it's like a two-way street at the same time, because you're sent by your government to be the government's face in communication with various Jewish organizations, and also. It was specifically my approach to that. I wanted to be somebody who, trying to understand as best as I could Jewish experience and Jewish perspectives on a lot of issues. I wanted to represent that voice and that experience within the Polish government, and tell people in the government what to do, to what to pay attention to. What are the sensitive issues? How to show our sensitivity? So yeah, being an intermediary, I think would best depict the job.
And what was the job like? In other words, was it if there's a problem, I better put out this fire, and when something bad happens or this, or did you just see the role? I mean, you're starting out from a point, I guess. My point is that we're starting from this idea that there's a certain commonly held view of Poland by Jews, by diaspora, by Jews around the world. Not only diaspora, I mean diaspora. So outside of Poland, outside of Polish Jews, inside Poland sometimes as well. But and I'm not talking about this government. I'm just talking about Poland overall. There's anti-Semitism here. It's by default an anti-Semitic place. So I mean, you weren't starting out with this. It's not a neutral position. You're sort of having to explain and to some degree defend the country, not in terms of not only in terms of what it was doing, during the period that you served, but just for the country itself, its history, fair or unfair. I guess that was part of the job.
Yeah, but I never thought of my job as desk officer, or later when my boss retired and I became the special envoy. I never saw my job as somebody who was trying to defend Poland or defend the image. Rather, I was trying to defend common sense and historical truth, to the extent that we as humans have access to historical truth or the facts. But at least you have historians, and if most historians agree on X,
then this is X. If they say it's Y or Z, then it's Z. And I thought my job, we're now talking about only part of that, because I understand that your question is about wartime and Poles and Jews during World War II, on the Holocaust,
post-war,
and pre-war anti-Semitism and post-war anti-Semitism. So I would, of course, that was not, it's not the whole picture. I would never shy away from saying, yes, there is anti-Semitism in Poland. And Poland is not the only country, on the globe. But yes, why should I say that there's no anti-Semitism in Poland? I would actually make a mockery of myself. So I thought of that job as trying to speak the truth. Sometimes, of course, it's not to speak the truth or speak about the truth in a way that would be fair both to the listener and to the country that is sending me. So that's what you call actually diplomacy. Sometimes you have to talk about nasty things in a way that is digestible and that is not offensive to anyone. That's what I was trying to do with regard to historical issues, with regard to contemporary issues like Jewish revival in Poland. It's very easy. It's a slippery road, because specifically in a country like Poland, you can say, oh, we have the Jewish revival in Poland, so what do you want? And you can use Jewish revival as a fig leaf.
Right.
So yeah.
No, absolutely, and you did a wonderful job. I can't imagine anybody would have done it better. I personally think it's just a very difficult job because there are so many preconceptions. So that's sort of what kind of we have to. I think it takes a special type, not necessarily only to do the job, but to do the job well. Somebody who's very, as you are, as I introduced you, as like the nicest guy, but also very, in the truest sense of the word, diplomatic. But what were the challenges though? I mean, I don't mean in a larger sense. I mean, were there any? Can you remember maybe any specific times where you said, oh my God, I'm talking to a group of Jews in Los Angeles and they're saying that Poland is this, or I went to the government and the government was on either side, of that? Were there any specific themes? I mean, I could say, oh, talking about the Holocaust or Jedwabne or pre-war, post-war, 68, or any individual times that for you kind of, that maybe would illustrate the complexity of the job that you were doing?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 examples, very brief, like 2 sentences each. West Coast, not LA, but West Coast. I was speaking to a group of Jews, members of a Jewish organization, very active people, and somebody said, "Listen, I remember how much I was outraged when I was at Auschwitz, where we were visiting. They were in the so-called Auschwitz I camp, not Birkenau, but Auschwitz itself." And that person said, the guy told us in most of the barracks that you can see, you had Polish inmates here, and my grandfather was also one of those inmates. And that person talking with me told me, listen, I was outraged because that Polish guide at Auschwitz, they were telling us about Polish inmates and about their grandparent who was at Auschwitz. To me, that was unacceptable. So that was the message that I got. It was I didn't want to say, well, what's wrong with that? There were Poles as well. Right. Sometimes you can't simply, say, no, you're wrong. Well, you're allowed to have your own feelings, but it was a difficult meeting. The other 2 examples of Poland, back in, I think, 2010 or 11, I co-edited a book with a friend of mine who also worked at the Foreign Ministry. The book was titled Inferno of Choices, and it was about wartime Polish-Jewish relations. It had 2 parts. One part was a selection of historical documents, and the other part was essays by historians. Some of those essays included topics like helping Jews for money, blackmailing, killing Jews, being indifferent, or stuff like that. The other part also had, within among the documents, you had documents issued by the Polish underground state saying, if
Poles collaborate with Germans in persecuting Jews, they will be submitted to a punishment. So it's a double message. One part of the message is, yes, there are Poles collaborating with the Germans. Yes, there are Poles blackmailing or even murdering Jews. The other part of the message is that's punishable. We, as representatives of the Polish underground state, are declaring that. The other example, and that we had a lot of problem with the far right, and not so much far right, but anybody right of center. It was difficult to a lot of people to understand that the Foreign Ministry would be publishing a book that is trying to be a comprehensive, to the extent that possible, comprehensive perspective on the Holocaust.
Well, let me jump in for a second. I know that you have one more example, but you touched on something that's interesting to me, living here as I, almost 20 years in Poland. The idea, and this will sort of come to when we come to these days and what's going on and the current government and all that, but Poles overall, and I, not everybody, and I'm generalizing here, to some degree have a difficult, and maybe others do as well, and I don't, Americans, we also have issues with it, but there's certain aspects of Polish, or Poles to some degree have a difficult, in my opinion, and tell me what you think, I'll put it that way. Poles have a difficult time seeing themselves in a more complex historical narrative, in the sense that they have this idea of either being victims and martyrs or being heroes, and the sometimes complex nature of any narrative or any identity, whether it's an individual or a people, or anybody has a complicated, and America did a lot of good things, and America killed the Indians, and America enslaved tens of millions of African Americans, and slavery and Jim Crow. We all have a complicated history, and it seems to me that Poland is a country where people, many people have had a difficult time dealing with the more complicated aspects. And now, at the same time, people are able to deal with, there are many people, and I feel that, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with the question, but I kind of felt like with this government, they sort of, things were going in a certain direction, and then it became, once again, that Poles were given a sort of free pass on the more difficult aspects, when I feel for years and years, Poles have been doing a good job of examining the more difficult aspects. And I think that it's healthy for a society to be able to examine that. And I think we've moved away from that. So I maybe asked you this question or brought this up a little early before we get to the current government, but that was just sort of something that's in my head that you must have an interesting perspective on this idea of Poles as the Christ among nations, and whether it's stopping the Turks, or being in between Germany and Russia, and being the sort of battleground place, always kind of gets the blame, and it's deeply ingrained in many aspects of Polish mentality. And politicians especially, can press those buttons and get a certain result, and that result is often xenophobia or anti-Semitism even.
Yeah. So first of all, the Poles were not very lucky to be given that piece of land that we have. And it's a matter of maturity, I guess. Having gone through a series of difficult experiences throughout history is not an easy thing. It's trying to look back with all honesty, and being aware of the great amount of suffering, and at the same time being able to say, yes, but here and there we did something wrong. Even if that wrong was not perpetrated in the name of the Polish nation or the Polish people, those who did it were Polish. And there's nothing wrong in saying that what was done wrong at that point in time, in that particular place, was done by Poles. Sometimes there were things done by Polish kings or members of the Polish nobility that were wrong, or that we should be ashamed of. It's like I'd like to compare this to a family. In a family, there's somebody, an ancestor who did something wrong, who was a murderer or a thief. It's not easy for that family to talk about that past. The easiest and the most often often taken approach is simply to keep silent about that, because nobody likes that. And a nation is like a huge family, and very few people are able to talk about difficult past, to face it. Very few. It's a kind of a learning process. It's a process of psychological growing up. And I considered that the book that we mentioned, I considered that as yet another step on that way to healing, to attaining some level of psychological health maturity. And that, as we all have seen over the last couple of years, for a number of reasons, that process has been stopped.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I've had even the discussion, with different diplomats, people, and from the current government about, and they get all so upset about Jan Gross and pointing out factual, I said, okay, but there are certain elements there that are true. I'm not getting into the specific details, and this discussion is a healthy discussion for a society. It's a cleansing, but I think it's difficult. It's just particularly difficult in some ways because I think for years and years Poles weren't able to learn. Maybe the being occupied for so long, and then communism or World War II, and then communism has sort of denied Poles this time to really truthfully examine their own history.
Yeah, that's true. And I want to say, as in my current capacity, that AJC has always been an active player on this field, trying to facilitate and further what we very often called, for lack of a better expression, Polish-Jewish dialogue. If there is such a thing as Polish-Jewish dialogue, then AJC has been active in shaping that. And we could have a separate show about the history of American Jewish involvement with Poland, and it goes back to 1917 and 18, and correspondence between Roman Dmowski and Paderewski. I guess Paderewski should be a name at least recognizable to some of us. And they corresponded with AJC leaders just days and months before Poland regained independence. And it was even more natural for AJC to be involved with Poland and Poles in the late 80s and 90s. And it has always been, AJC's voice has always been one of rationality, common sense, and readiness for cooperation.
And dialogue. And absolutely, and of course. So very good that you kind of brought us up this. So the government, new government comes in. You finish your term at the Department of Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, and very briefly speaking, that's what happened.
Yes, very briefly speaking, that's what happened. So maybe because I sort of wanted to ask how things changed with peace, but I think we've sort of kind of gone there a little bit. We can kind of come back in a second. But so you go to work for AJC. So maybe just talk a little bit about, as you said so beautifully, about AJC's history. And I will tell you something, my opinion, that a couple of years ago, when things were very difficult in Poland for the Jewish community because of the IPN law, right? This idea of what it was legal to say and not say. Many organizations got involved with Poland, and all the alphabet, the whole alphabet of the American International Jewish World, AJC, WJC, JDC, ADL, this one, that one, this one, that one. And many of them straight away contacted the Polish leaders and the Polish government and didn't really get the input of the local Jewish community. And I want to commend you and AJC for, I mean, really among, not the only ones, but really the ones who did the best job of, before going and calling the prime minister, speaking to the local Jews, speaking to us, understanding on the ground how these things affect us, not only the image of the Holocaust and people around the world, but that there is actually a Jewish community. And I think AJC has done a wonderful job of that. So I wanted to thank you, but maybe talk a little bit about the AJC, just maybe not historically, because I think we would take in a whole episode to talk about just what AJC has sort of done over the years, but maybe talk about the founding of the Silverberg Shapiro office in Warsaw, why in Warsaw, and a little bit what you do as the Central European office of AJC.
Okay, so the decision was based on, I guess, quite simple reasoning that Poland is historically super important for the Jewish world. And in terms of present day politics, it's the biggest European Union member in Central and Eastern Europe. From among the the 10 countries that joined the European Union back in 2004. Poland was the biggest. So it made sense on both accounts, the historical account and contemporary politics. The AJC Central Europe office covers or serves 7 countries, not only Poland, but also the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. The 4 basic pillars of AJC were, whether Central Europe, Paris, or the US, is partnering with the Jewish community and acting in favor of defending the interests of the Jewish community, defending Israel's right internationally for being treated fairly, just as any other nation under the sun, in no better way or worse way, just like any other nation.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other pillar is confronting and countering extremism, and the 4th pillar is supporting the transatlantic bond. So these pillars have been the backbone of AJC for decades now. And what we do in Central Europe is we definitely partner with Jewish organizations. We have even, it's even translated to the level of association agreements with major umbrella Jewish organizations, but we partner in real life on a number of initiatives. We talk with governments. We talk with governments when it comes to countering anti-Semitism, furthering bilateral relations with Israel, but also strengthening Israel's relations with the European Union, or sometimes defending Israel within the European Union or on other international fora. So we talk with government representatives, specifically with the foreign ministries when there's something going on at the UN. There's a voting in UNESCO, for example. It's about Jerusalem as the historical capital of the Jewish people. You have a UNESCO document that doesn't even mention the word Temple Mount. It only says Haram al-Sharif. Then it's also our job to talk to governments. Listen, as Christians, you represent nations that are basically Christian. It makes sense to talk of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount also as the Temple Mount, because it's important for Judaism and Christianity. It's not only it of course is an important site for Islam, but not exclusively for Islam. We talk about various laws adopted within the European Union or member states, like the ban on ritual slaughter, recently adopted by Belgium or parts of Belgium. We had a similar thing in Poland back in 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
It comes
So
up
this
every once
is
in a while.
always on our agenda.
Yeah. No, yeah, the ritual slaughter, and some places even circumcision. There are movements about it, not in Poland yet, but how do you see Polish-Jewish relations these days? I mean, it was a bit rosier and easier. Things were a little bit easier back in the day when you were at the foreign ministry, not only because you were at the foreign ministry, no, but I'm teasing, but certainly this government, although I don't feel in any sense that this government is anti-Semitic, I feel that there are certain values that they hold, which to some degree are different from the majority of what Jews hold, and that they have more issues with, there are issues with their, as I talked about before, to some degree almost historical revisionism, which is that while it's technically true to talk all the time about the righteous, you can't talk about the righteous without mentioning that people also did things that weren't so nice. So while it might technically be true to focus only on them, it's, when I was a little kid with my dad, he would give me money. I remember going to the racetrack with my dad. I'm talking 40 years ago. And if he gave me money, he would give me $1 that I would pick a horse or something, and he would let me bet. And if I lost, it didn't count. But if I won, I got to keep the money. In other words, there was like an imbalance. And I only when I was older, I was like, wait a minute, you have to count the total. Not only when you win that you get money back, it's yours, or else it doesn't count. So I think that this government a little bit it's different than anti-Semitism, because they're very proud of good things that they feel that Poles have done and even continue to do for Jews. And they're not dismissive of the Jewish revival. They're, as you say, almost maybe can use it almost as a fig leaf, but they're reluctant to acknowledge more painful aspects of Polish history. Now, how is that affected, as you see, Polish-Jewish relations in 2021?
Okay,
Within Poland, or
Jonathan, AJC is in American terms, we're a bipartisan organization, and in European terms, I would say we're a nonpartisan organization, which means we never partner, we never support governments, we support values. That being said, just yesterday, AJC issued a statement saying that actually being very straightforward about President Trump's role in fueling what happened at the Capitol Hill, saying that was an act of sedition. And the reason why I said that is that being a nonpartisan organization based in Poland, we have been several times vocally critical of some of the decisions of this government. And you rightly mentioned already the so-called IPN law, the very controversial and actually counterproductive law. Last year, we were also critical, openly critical, to the extent of addressing a media monitoring body because of how public television was reporting parts of the presidential campaign, and they were actually smearing one of the candidates. And we couldn't care less about which candidate they were talking about. We definitely cared about what they were saying, and what they were saying were examples of clear-cut anti-Semitism. Typical anti-Semitic tropes were used in primetime public television, evening news broadcasts, and we were vocal about it. That does not mean that we have that we generally look at this government through a very specific prism that would make it look bad generally. No, definitely not. It's about particular decisions. And so 2020 was not the best year for Polish-Jewish relations. If you're asking about 2021, I'm not a fortune teller. But I want to believe that people have at least some scant ability to learn from the past, and what we've been through over the last let's say 3 years, starting from 2018 and last year included. It's time actually to see that sometimes if you want to defend the good image or the rosy image of Poland, you're actually destroying it, because to the outside world, that doesn't look serious. And I very much hope that people like you and institutions like yours and the Warsaw JCC and the various kehilot that we have in Poland, that all these institutions and people who work in these institutions, their voice will be heard better than in the past, because your voice, I cannot underscore enough that your voice for this Polish government, when it comes to Polish-Jewish relations, your voice should come first before making public statements, making decisions that definitely refer to Jewish history or Polish-Jewish history or Jewish experience. They should listen to you. Guys, listen, will that work well for Polish-Jewish relations? Are you fine? What do you think about that?
Right. Consultation. I think for us, the difficult year has not been so many really Jewish issues. The difficult year for us has been women's issues and been LGBT issues. I feel that for me, being Jewish means standing for certain values beyond kashrut or a kippah or anything else. To me, that's the definition for me of being Jewish. And it's been difficult. It's been a fine line, somebody running an institution with his own personal opinions, not to just have the institution be a vehicle for my opinion, but also I think that we as a community generally stand for something, and we as Jews stand for something, and those things sometimes run afoul of what's going on. So I think sometimes there's a bit of strained relations between the local Jewish community and the government, even if it's not really Jewish issues, it's LGBT issues or women's issues or things like that. But I think
I couldn't agree more, Jonathan. As you know, the current Minister of Education, we initiated an initiative to actually try and explain that he's not the best person to hold this position. Somebody who claims LGBT people, I quote, are not normal people. Somebody who says, human rights, what is that? We thought, and it was not that we were representing the Jewish position, but there are certain values, whether you're Jewish or otherwise, you have to stand up for. And we that was a coalition of the willing, the coalition of people simply thinking, hello, as Minister of Education, you really have to know better that there are things you cannot compromise.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the reaction of the government is sort of looks at us like, well, what do you guys? We're nice to you. What are you upset about? What do you want from us? And that without necessarily understanding. Oh, we're nice to the Jews. We're not bothering them. And they're still complaining. But listen, what can you do? It's not easy being Jewish. It's never been easy, and I think that it does not meant to be easy. It's part of being Jewish. I think there's meant to be a certain challenge to it, and I guess that extends to organizationally as well. Sometimes you have to walk a fine line. But at the end of the day, if we as Jews or as a Jews or Jewish organization don't stand up for others, then what are we doing? Who will? Then who will? And then what do we exist for? So I hope that this year will bring a focus, not only healing and warmth and all the niceties and platitudes, truth. I think that a lot of where we've gotten as a world is that people are afraid of the truth, and people think that the truth is something that can hurt them, instead of understanding that at the end of the day, the truth is always going to be the thing that leads us out of darkness. So I hope that I'm excited to continue to work with you on a personal level, to continue to partner with AJC, which I think is a phenomenal organization. I was so happy when it
Thank you, John.
open, although it's in Warsaw, not in Krakow. I do understand that.
Well, nobody's perfect, even AJC.
Even AJC, I do understand lately for the past few hundred years, the capital sort of has been Warsaw. So I guess it makes sense. We'll forgive you. You have better flights when the World Cup. But I have a couple. So as we finish up, Sebastian, I have to ask you, are you Team Latka or Team Hamantash?
I think latkes. I think latkes. Yeah, I can only eat like two or three donuts in a row, but an innumerable number of latkes.
Good answer. Very diplomatic. And you're three.
No, I did say latkes.
I did. You did. You took a stand, but also, showed your love.
I didn't want to offend the.
Oh no,
team.
No, yeah. Of course. Well, who doesn't love the Hamantash? It's just not the latka.
Yeah.
Sebastian, your three favorite films.
Silence of the Lamb.
Okay.
The Flight Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay, one film.
Okay. The third one is going to be also an American film, although I would have a Polish film as well. I'll say Apocalypse Now, and when we talk about Poland, Tato is also a film I really like.
I like it. I like your answers very much. Sebastian, my friend, always good to talk to you. I can't wait to see you.
My pleasure, Jonathan.
Give you a hug.
I can't wait to see you in person and for a nice glass of apple juice.
Apple juice for both of us. Good man. Love to Martina. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody, be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.